Hi, this is Reverend Bill Benucci from the New York State Faith and Freedom Coalition. Here with the teaching today. This is really the 10th lesson in our Rebuilding Liberty Part 2 program as we prepare for the celebration of the 250th celebration of our Declaration. We just completed a study on the New York State Constitution, which you can find on our Rumble channel. And today we're going to take a brief look at the Declaration of Independence in preparation for that grand celebration on July 4th of this year. So let's take a look at it together. We are, by the way, America by Faith, the Fear Not Fellowship, and our theme is Reclaiming America in 2026. And the word that we're declaring for this year is taken from Isaiah 59:19 that says, "When the enemy shall come in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard against it." And our charge to everyone is this year to truly raise the standard, beginning in your own personal walk with the Lord, whatever God is challenging you to do, whatever sin is so easily entangled in you, get rid of it. It's called repent and really move forward in the things of God. And also work to become that man of integrity, that woman of integrity, the husband, the dad, the wife, the mom that God called you to be, and be the very best you can personally in your family, and then stepping out into the community. If God is challenging you to get on the school board, go for it. If He's challenging you to run for election or to attend a town council meeting or school board meeting, wherever God is challenging you, our encouragement to you is to raise the standard. Quit saying no to God and say yes to God, because where the righteous rule, the people will rejoice. So let's take a look. Actually, before we look at the Declaration itself, let's just take a look at some of the founding documents that were instrumental in providing us the freedoms that we enjoy today. We're really the only country that was founded on a piece of paper, rather than being founded by conquest or force or what. We were actually founded on some principles that were established in unwritten documents. The first one was actually the Magna Carta. Now that was even before America was America. Pilgrims weren't even here yet. But in 1215 in England, uh, this really started. The nobleman had a problem with the king because he thought he was the ultimate authority, and they established that the king is not the ultimate authority, that there is a King of Kings and a Lord of Lords to which everyone must be accountable to. And this is the first time in world history where this was pretty much established as a principle. That was in 1215. Then let's go down about 400 years later to the landing of the Pilgrims in 1620 with the Mayflower Compact. This is the document that they signed together because they came. They realized that they had landed in an area that they did not have a charter for from the King of England, so they had to come up with their own set of governing principles. And this is the first time that people came together to covenant. Now, the covenant is different than a contract. A contract is something between an agreement between two people. A covenant is an agreement between two people and God, in which God is present. And this is the first time that people came together to covenant together to govern themselves. And they said why they came here in that document. They said they came here for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian religion. And then moving down to 1776, which we're going to study today, the Declaration of Independence asserted independence and individual rights. And we broke from England, the mother country. Then in 1781, we had the Articles of Confederation, which were the first framework for national government, though it was very weak and was not sufficient for the cause. So then in 1789, we came up with the U.S. Constitution. This established our current federal system, and to that was attached the Bill of Rights in 1791, which secured specific civil liberties, which many states would not even ratify the Constitution unless the Bill of Rights was attached to it. So that's just the basic framework of the founding documents. You could have added to that a couple of others, the Treaty of Paris and so on, but that'll give us a basic outline of what some of the founding documents were. So let's look at some of the events that led up to the signing of the Declaration. Let's start out here with the French and Indian War. Remember what happened? We had the colonists which settled along the coast, and then all of a sudden the French tried to take some territory to the west of us, and they got the Indians involved with them, and they tried to come against the colonists and against the British, which were British colonies. So the King of England came and sent his troops to help us defend against the French and the Indians, and that was the French and Indian War. Now, we succeeded, but the problem there was that the England pretty much went bankrupt during that process. So they decided that they wanted to recoup some of their expenses that they spent on the French and Indian War. So in 1765, they issued the Stamp Act. This was the first direct tax on printed materials. The colonists began to protest. You might remember the call, no taxation without representation, because the king was just imposing taxes on them willy-nilly, however he felt, without them having any say-so in it whatsoever. And then in 1767, he came out with the Townshend Act. Taxes placed on glass, paper, lead, paint, tea, pretty much anything. If it moved, they taxed it. And that continued to build a resentment amongst the colonists until 1770. We had what we remember as the Boston Massacre. British troops fired into a crowd, killing 5 colonists, patriots, and sentiment grows. And this is where actually the first martyr of the War for Independence was actually an African American, an American Indian named Crispus Attucks, who was like a longshoreman in a sense. He was a seaman at that point, but he was the first martyr of the Revolution, an African American, an American Indian there as well. Then in 1773, we remember the Boston Tea Party. Colonists protect the Tea Act by dumping tea into the Boston Harbor, and that pretty much got King George really, really ticked. And instead of getting the message, he came down harder on the colonists. In 1774, he came down with the Intolerable Acts. Britain punishes Massachusetts with harsh laws. The First Continental Congress is then formed to decide, hey, what are we going to do about this king? It's not getting pretty. We need to come together and talk about how we can resist him. Now understand, they had 13 different colonies, 13 different cultures, different languages, customs, and so on. It was really a miracle of God that you get 13 of them to come together, but really what had prepared them for was the First Great Awakening by people like Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, who went preaching up and down the East Coast, preaching the idea that we are one nation under God, and that kind of gave them that sense of unity that they needed to come against King George, the greatest military in the world at that time. They needed to be united, and pretty much the Great Awakening, God's providence, was what really prepared them to come together in one voice. Then in April 1775, we had the Lexington and Concord battle that one shot heard around the world. We all hear about it. Armed conflict begins between the colonists and the Britain. Now it was now all-out war. That was pretty much the official beginning in that sense. May 1775, the Second Continental Congress is now convened. Now remember, the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia only lasted for a couple of months, I believe. The Second Continental Congress started in May of 1775 and went on through the entire duration of the War for Independence and until we came up with the Articles of Confederation that we'll talk about in a sense. So they were in Congress a longer period of time, and in fact they weren't in any one place. They had to move around a lot to evade the British, so they can conduct business. So they went from Philadelphia to New York to Annapolis. They went in different locations to evade the British, but they remained in Congress. Delegates meet in Philadelphia George Washington is appointed as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army during the Second Continental Congress. Then in July 1775, they publish what they call the Olive Branch Petition. Congress sends a final plea to King George III, and he rejects it and declares that the colonies are in rebellion. January 1776, Thomas Paine's powerful pamphlet argues for independence. It's widely read and turns many colonials toward the patriot cause. At that point, there was a lot of division in the colonies. Some of them were sitting on the fence, didn't know which way to go, and his pamphlet, Common Sense, helped many come to the cause of independence. At that time, now depending on what source you read, the numbers vary, but pretty much it was probably about 1/3 patriots, 1/3 Tories. Now remember, Tories were the ones who were loyal to the king, to Britain, and about 1/3 were totally independent. They could care less, which as long as it didn't come and affect them personally, they had no opinion. They can go either way. Much the same as today, unfortunately. June 7th, 1776, we have the Lee Resolution. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia proposes a resolution in Congress that these United States are and ought to be free and independent states. Those were fighting words. And June 11th, 1776, the Committee of Five is established. A Committee of Five is established to write the Declaration. That committee was made up of Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston, and we'll talk more about them in just a minute. July 2nd, 1776, Congress votes in favor of independence by a near unanimous vote, and July 4th, Declaration of Independence is adopted. So that just gives you a little bit of the timeline of the events leading up to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Now let's talk a little bit about who were these people. At least half of them had studied divinity at their various universities. The denomination breakdown as follows. Some had more than one denomination. 32 were Episcopalians or Anglicans, the old state Church of England. Now remember, this was the Church of England. It was the Anglicans. But when we broke away from the British, we could no longer be part of their British church. So we had to have our own. So became the Episcopalians, which was basically the American version of the British Anglican Church. 13 of them were Congregationalists. 12 of them were Presbyterians, and actually King George talked about this being a Presbyterian rebellion. That's how much influence the church had in those days. And 2 of them were Quakers, 2 of them were Unitarians, and 1 was a Roman Catholic in a time when it was difficult to be a Roman Catholic because there was a lot of discrimination. Catholics were very under suspicion because it was thought that anyone who was loyal to the Pope was loyal to another authority. He would never be loyal to the United States of America. So there was a time when it was very difficult for Catholics at that time, and it remained for quite a long time. Anyway, the Bible was the chief source of the framers' education, illustrated by their creation of the New England Primer as the school book. Now, that was one of their primary school books. Now, 34% of the quotations in the framers' writings came directly from the Bible. This is according to an American Political Science Review published in 1984 by Dr. Donald Lutz and Dr. Charles Heinemann, when they researched a lot of the writings of the framers, and they came up with this final analysis that 34% of them came directly from the Bible. The New England Primer was one of the first school books that was used in the public schools in the colonies. But just to give you an idea of one of the lessons in the Primer to see how much of the Bible they used, let's just take a look at this one briefly. So, for example, here it says, the nightingales sing in time of spring. Nice poetic little line. The sturdy oak, it was the tree that saved his royal majesty. Peter denies his Lord and cries, right, straight from the Bible. Queen Esther comes in royal estate to save the Jews from dismal fate. Bible. Rachel doth mourn for her firstborn. Bible. Samuel anoints whom God appoints. Bible as well. Time cuts down all, both great and small. Uriah's lovely wife made David seek his life. Again from the Bible. Whales in the sea, God's voice obey. Xerxes the Great did die, and so must you and I. Bible. Youth's forward slips, death soonest nips. Zacchaeus did climb the tree, his Lord to see. So you see how much of the Bible was part of their upbringing. It was pretty much their primary education. All right, so let's take a look at this Second Continental Congress that came together to figure out what to do about this King George. Richard Henry Lee, we said, proposed independence for the American colonies by introducing this resolution in the Second Continental Congress on June 7th, 1776. In June 1776, the Continental Congress advised each of the 13 colonies to adopt its own government directly under the authority of the people. Remember what were the first 3 words of our U.S. Constitution? We the people. That was the whole idea of it. No longer a king. Delaware declared its independence on June 15, 1776. The Assembly of the Lower Counties of Pennsylvania declared itself independent of British and Pennsylvania authority, thereby creating the first state called the Delaware State. So if you ever see a Delaware license plate, you see it says the first state, because they were. Meanwhile, back in Philadelphia, the Delaware delegation, consisting of George Read and Thomas McKean, now were deadlocked. One voted for independence and one voted not for independence. And every state had a vote, so they were deadlocked, as the deciding vote supporting unanimously for independence, leading to the story of Cesar Rodney's famous ride. So let's take a look at that, see.
All in favor? All opposed? That was only a straw vote to see where we stand. Well, only Delaware and Pennsylvania stand against the independence resolution. But in order to adopt it, the vote must be unanimous. The actual vote will take place tomorrow morning. Until then, we are dismissed.
Rat! If only Cesar Rodney of Delaware were here, he'd vote with us and bring Delaware to our side.
Cesar Rodney is bedridden. Wait a minute. James, could you and Moses race to Delaware to visit a sick friend?
If it's thieves, I'm alone. You'll only have me to rob.
We're not robbers.
Then you've come to escort me to the next world.
No, just Philadelphia.
That's a far cry from heaven.
Dr. Franklin sent us.
With news of the independence resolution?
The vote is tomorrow, and your vote is very important.
Help me out of bed, gentlemen.
Wouldn't it be better if you rode in the carriage with us?
Speed is everything. Gah! Thanks again, fellows.
That cough sounds bad.
We'd better try to keep up with him.
I don't understand why you wouldn't let us take it.
Now you've seen a real hero.
Steady, Rodney. I've got to make it inside. As I believe the voice of my constituents and of all sensible and honest men, is in favor of independence. My own judgment concurs with them. I vote for independence.
It's unanimous. The resolution on independence passes.
So that was the story of Caesar Rodney. Now, let's continue. These men, they placed their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. 5 signers were captured by the British as traitors and tortured before they died. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their sons serving in the Revolutionary Army. Another had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 had died from wounds or hardships from the Revolutionary War. What kind of men were they? 24 were lawyers and jurists, 11 were merchants, 9 were farmers and large plantation owners, men of means, well educated, but they signed the Declaration of Independence knowing full well that the penalty would be death if they were captured. Carton Braxton of Virginia, a wealthy planter and trader, had his ship swept away from the seas by the British Navy. He sold his properties to pay his debts, and he died in rags, a pauper. Thomas McKean was so hounded by the British that he was forced to move his family almost constantly. He served in the Congress without pay, and his family was kept in hiding. His possessions were taken from him, and poverty was his reward. Vandals, the soldiers, looted the properties of Dillery, Hall, Clymer, Walton, Gwinnett, Haywood, Rutledge, and Milton. At the Battle of Yorktown, Thomas Nelson Jr. noted that the British General Cornwallis had actually taken over the Nelson home for his own headquarters. So what did he do? He quietly urged General George Washington to open fire on his own home, and his own home was destroyed. Nelson died bankrupt. Francis Lewis had his home and properties destroyed. The enemy jailed his wife, and she died within a few months after being released. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside as she was dying. Their 13 children fled for their lives. His fields and his gristmill were waste. For more than a year he lived in forests and caves, returning home to find his wife dead and his children vanished. Abraham Clark, delegate from New Jersey, had 2 of his sons captured by the British and imprisoned on the prison ship off of Staten Island, which is pretty much a death sentence for anyone. The British then offered to free his sons if he would simply renounce his signature on the Declaration. Guess what? Abraham Clark would not renounce his signature. Now, John Quincy Adams told us in 1837, speaking to a crowd which is speaking to us today, because he addressed posterity, that's us. He said, "You will never know how much it cost the present generation to preserve your future freedom. I hope you will make good use of it." That charge is a charge to us today. Who were the Committee of 5? Thomas Jefferson from Virginia, the primary author, John Adams of Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, Robert Livingston of New York, and Roger Sherman of Connecticut. These were the 5 who were given the charge. Now, Jefferson initially wanted Adams to write it, but Adams flatly refused. According to Adams' own recollections, he gave Jefferson 3 reasons why he ought to be the one to write the Declaration. He said, first of all, you are a Virginian, and a Virginian ought to appear at the head of this business. And that's what, again, that was a time when the New England states were thought of as the rebels, as the real routers, and there was tension even between the New England states and the Middle Atlantic states. So that's why Adams thought that it should be a Virginian from the Mid-Atlantic states to write that. He said, secondly, he said, I am obnoxious, suspected, and unpopular. You are very much otherwise. In other words, you would be respected a heck of a lot more than I would. And then thirdly, he said, you can write 10 times better than I can. Jefferson relented and took up the pen. So now let's take a look at that Declaration of Independence. The preamble to the Declaration of Independence says this, says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such a manner to them that shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Now, it went on to say, prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms which they are accustomed to. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces the design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their own security. So this was just the preamble. Now, what are some of the governing principles that were expressed in this preamble? Let's take a look at that. First of all, it is that there is absolute truth. Basically, they were saying these are self-evident truths. They're evident to all. You don't need a book to tell you that when you created, God put that in you. These are truths that are self-evident. Secondly, that our rights come from God. They don't come from government. They don't come from Congress. Our rights come from God himself. You're created with those inalienable rights. That is the absolute truth. Our rights are inalienable. They cannot be taken away by government. If God gave them to you, only God can take them away. No government has the right to take away these inalienable rights given to you by God. Fourthly, all people are created equal. Doesn't mean they're all 5'8", or they're all white, or they're all black, or they're all smart, or they're all dumb. It just means they're all created equal in the image of God. Each and every one of us are equal before the law. Fifthly, government's job is to secure those rights, to protect those rights, to secure the liberties granted to us by God himself. And sixth, government power comes from we, the people. In other words, we lend the power to the government to help secure order and righteousness in our society, but we lend it to the government to do that. It comes from the people. And if it doesn't work out, the people may reform or replace abusive government. It is in fact their right, it is their duty to replace governments that are abusive or are not fulfilling their responsibility to secure the rights of liberty given to us by God. All right, so that was the preamble that kind of set the tone for it. And then they went on to list 27 grievances in the Declaration. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on them because there are 27. So we're just going to kind of list them briefly for you. This is just a survey course of the Declaration. We could spend weeks and weeks on each of them, but we're not going to. First of all, he refused to approve beneficial colonial laws. The king, these are grievances against King George. He refused to approve beneficial colonial laws. He forbade governors from passing urgent laws without his approval. He wanted to be king. 3, he refused laws unless colonists gave up representation. 4, he called legislative meetings in distant, inconvenient places. And believe me, when you look at some of these grievances, you're going to see a lot of parallels of things going on even today that were similar to that. Even today, he called legislative meetings in distant, inconvenient places. Today, our state government in New York, they pass laws at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning when they think no one's going to be there. The same idea. They wanted to do it away away from public so they could do their hanky-panky when no one's looking. Fifth, he dissolved the colonial legislatures for opposing him. If he didn't like what they did, he would just dissolve their legislature and say, you have no power anymore. I'm king. Sixth, he refused to allow elections for dissolving legislatures. 7, he blocked population growth by restricting naturalization and land grants. So he tried to control where they settled and who settled where. 8, he obstructed justice by refusing to establish judiciary powers. Again, he wanted to do his own thing. 9, he obstructed justice by refusing to establish, that's a duplicate. Let's go on to the 10th one. He created many new offices to harass colonists. Again, even that one, creating many new offices to harass colonists, that's the administrative state. That's what's going on today as the government gets bigger and bigger and bigger and creates more and more offices to harass and make things more difficult for we the people. 11, he maintained standing armies in peacetime without consent. In other words, he even had the quartering thing where colonists were required to house and feed British soldiers if they so desired. 12, he made the military independent of civilian authority. In other words, if you notice, even in our country, our military is always headed up by a civilian. Today, Pete Hegseth is a civilian. Yes, he's a veteran, but he's a civilian. And the military always comes under civilian authority, because if it didn't, we would be concerned about a military dictatorship. So this kind of is a preventative measure to be sure that we never become a military dictatorship. It must always be headed up by a Secretary of War or Defense. Today it's Secretary of War, and today it is Pete Hegseth. 13, he combined with others to impose unconstitutional acts. 14, he quartered troops among the colonists. That's what we just talked about that. He did that. 15, he protected British soldiers from punishment through mock trials. They did something wrong, they weren't punished rightly. 16, he cut off colonial trade with the world. He wanted to control pretty much everything at this point. He imposed taxes without their consent. That's where you get your taxation without representation. If you notice, that's only one of the 27 grievances that they had at that point. 18, he denied colonists the right to trial by jury. He transported colonists overseas for trial. In other words, you were brought on trial, you had to go to England to be tried. And how many people could actually afford to go to England and have your people show up with you to trial? So it was very, very difficult for people to be tried. 20, he abolished English laws in neighboring provinces and expanded arbitrary rule. 21, he altered colonial charters and forms of government at his will. 22, he suspended colonial legislatures and claimed power to legislate for them. Again, he just wanted to be king. 23, he abdicated government by declaring the colonies out of his protection and waging war. 24, he plundered the seas, ravaged coasts, burned down towns, and destroyed lives. 25, he transported foreign mercenaries to wage war on the colonies. Remember, he hired the Hessians to come and to fight on behalf of Britain against Americans. 26, he forced captured colonists to fight against their own people. Imagine that. He would capture American prisoners and then force them, compel them to fight against their own brothers and sisters and families and stuff. And 27, he incited domestic insurrections and Native American attacks on colonial settlers. So these were the grievances that were put by the colonists against King George. And again, you can look at a lot of parallels of things that are going on today as well. All right, so those are the grievances. Let's take a look at the closing paragraph of the Declaration. It says, "We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for this we submit this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. We pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So what was the impact of publishing the Declaration? It transformed a rebellion into a war for independence. Before the Declaration, the conflict with Great Britain was technically a civil war within the British Empire. After July 4th, 1776, the colonies formally declared themselves free and independent states. The war was no longer about rights within the empire. It was about complete separation. Reconciliation with Britain became politically impossible. This hardened loyalties. People had to choose patriot or Tory or loyalist. The Declaration gave a shared moral justification for independence, a unified political statement explaining why separation was necessary, a list of grievances that rallied public support. It strengthened colonial resolve at a time when the war was going poorly, especially around New York in 1776. New York was a Tory stronghold. There were more Tories here, and it was tough. Pretty much like today, it is pretty tough in that sense as well. It helped secure foreign support, especially France. One of the most important effects was international. By declaring independence, the colonies became a potential sovereign nation. Foreign powers could legally justify alliances, particularly after the war for Saratoga, the Battle of Saratoga. When we won that kind of gave the French the incentive to get and join up with us. In 1778, France formally allied with the United States, an alliance that proved decisive in defeating British at Yorktown. Without the declaration, France likely would not have opted to join the war. And again, the Battle of Saratoga was a big incentive for them to help support the war, the colonists. It inspired revolutionary ideals. The Declaration introduced enduring principles. Number one, that all men are created equal, that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed, that people have the right to alter or abolish unjust governments. And again, each one of these, we could spend a whole lesson on each one of these, but today's is just a survey. These ideas influenced the French Revolution, Latin American independence movements, later abolitionist and civil rights movements in America. Its language became a moral measuring rod for future generations. This started a whole generation, a whole era of revolutions pretty much around the world. Before then, hardly anyone would ever think of breaking loose from their colonial powers that controlled them. But once we established our independence, it really inspired other wars for independence around the world, namely the French Revolution. That one didn't end as well because it wasn't based on the same principles that ours was. Ours was based on the idea that there was no king but Jesus. Their idea was that there was just no king. It was based on reason. That's why it didn't work out very well, and you ended up with the Reign of Terror and the guillotine and all that stuff. Okay. It deepened division within America. Now, not everyone supported independence. The effects included loyalists fleeing to Canada or Britain. Many of the Tories didn't go for it, and many of them escaped to Canada. I remember when 1968, when I enlisted in the Air Force at that time during Vietnam, there were many escaping to Canada to avoid the draft as well. Pretty much the same thing was happening during the War for Independence at that point. There was confiscation of loyalist property. Once they abandoned their property, it was taken over. Families were divided. Increased violence in some colonies because of the polarization. Much to the same as today, there's an increasing polarization between the left and the right as well. The Declaration intensified internal conflict as much as it did to unify patriots. So there was a polarization that happened on both ends at that point. It established the moral foundation of the new nation. Although the Constitution 1787 created the structure of a government, the Declaration established the philosophy of a covenantal foundation of America. It defined the purpose of government, the source of legitimate authority, and the standard by which government would be judged. Now remember, we talked about the covenant is the idea of a contract in which God is present. Without God, you can have no American covenant. You can have no American system. It was President Eisenhower who said that without God, without the acknowledgement of God, there can be no American form of government, nor an American way. He said the acknowledgement of God is the first or foremost expression of Americanism. So today, when I run into someone and they say, "Hey, Bill, are you trying to say that I can't be an American if I don't believe in God?" Well, you're going to be an American. I mean, anyone who passes the legal requirements to be an American can be, but you certainly can't be a good one if you can't even ascribe to our national motto. That's "In God We Trust." This nation is founded on godly principles, and we must never, never let that go. Later leaders like Abraham Lincoln would call it the apple of gold, and he gets that from Proverbs, where it says, "A word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver." So it was framed by the Constitution. So in summary, the Declaration made independence official. It justified the revolution morally. It united the colonies politically. It enabled foreign alliances. It has inspired global liberty movements. It set America's enduring philosophical foundation. Its immediate effect was political and military. Its long-term impact was ideological and global. We are that city upon a hill, that bastion of freedom where other countries can look to for inspiration to live free. All right, well, that's the end of our teaching for today. Thank you for being with us. If you want more information, feel free to send me an email. Send it to bill@nyfaithandfreedom.com, and we'll keep you informed of future teachings as we go on. So take care. Thank you for listening. Take care, and God bless.